everyone, and thank you for joining. Welcome to today's webinar with Salesforce and All Cloud, Managing Your Salesforce Roadmap, What's Next After Implementation. Today's presenters include Trip Murphy, VP of Commercial Sales at Salesforce, and OJ Malonzo, SVP of Strategic Accounts at All Cloud. A few logistics items before we get started. Please utilize the chat function in the bottom right-hand corner to ask any questions you have during today's presentation. We'll hold an open Q&A at the end of today's event and address any questions then. With that, I'll hand it over to Trip.
Great. Thank you, Katie. So good afternoon and good morning to everyone on the phone. It's great to be speaking with you all today, and certainly thank you for taking the time to speak with us or connect with us. So just a quick overview of the agenda today. We'll be doing just a quick welcome and introductions. We'll be talking about the state of Salesforce, and then evaluating where you're at today and sort of what's next from there. We'll then be going through what it means to build a roadmap and then highlight the figure eight story. And OJ will speak very closely to that, and then add in some Q&A at the end for any questions that you may have from there. So a bit of background on myself. Right now, I lead one of our small and medium-sized growth business teams within Salesforce. I'm based out of the East Coast. Been with the company for 6 years, and it's actually incredible to think back of when I first started. We actually were only providing sales, service, and rolling out Community Cloud at the time. So a lot has changed over the years in just a short span of time. And then I'll hand it over to OJ just to do a bit of an introduction on himself.
Great. Thank you, Trip. Hi, everyone. My name is OJ Malonzo, and I'm the SVP of Strategic Accounts at All Cloud. Have been in the Salesforce ecosystem since 2006. So to Trip's point, have seen quite a lot of progress or progression of the platform and to what it's doing for customers today. So excited to be sharing not only what to do next when it comes to building a governance model, but how we did it when we started Figure Eight Cloud Solutions, a small company that I had co-founded. Thanks, Trip.
Thanks, OJ. And I guess for the audience, when we first started collaborating with OJ and team on the webinar, we started to reflect on the fact that, whether you're early on in your journey with Salesforce, maybe recently implemented or many years in, the current environment has certainly led us to face challenges that many of us could have never predicted. And I think now more than ever, it's really important to focus on building a strong foundation and roadmap that will lead to future success. For me personally, the pandemic has allowed me to reflect on our core pillars of trust, customer success, innovation, and equality. Specific to what we're going to be talking through today, it really is to try and help each of you to be more successful and innovative in your journey and to put a roadmap and governance in place that will lead to success for you and your customers in the future. I think it's important to mention that to do this well, it really is a team effort amongst each of you, and then also working really closely with your core Salesforce team, and in many cases, a trusted partner and advisor such as All Cloud, who can help to guide you through some best practices, and then also increase the time to value and talk to some of the roadblocks that our clients have seen in the past. So I'll hand it over to OJ, but certainly hope that each of you can take away from this some real life lessons learned, and then apply it to your own roadmap and strategy moving forward.
Thanks, Trip. Appreciate it. So All Cloud is a global Salesforce Platinum Consulting partner. We're also an AWS Premier Consulting partner with about 12 years of experience, about 300 employees, and thousands of successful deployments across all the different core clouds, including a CPQ practice. I'm going to go into my background and overall story about Figure Eight Cloud Solutions, a company that I had founded. But before we kick things off, I did want to start with acknowledging that some of you who are on the webinar today are at a different stage in your current journey of using Salesforce. You may be asking yourself the following questions. How can I maximize my investment in Salesforce? You have a Salesforce administrator. You are the Salesforce administrator or looking to hire one. Now what do I do? Am I customizing the application using best practices and making changes into production in a structured format? And asking the question, are all the stakeholders involved? These are all pretty common questions that companies we work with have, and you're not alone. But figuring out what to do next and how to use Salesforce to drive change within your organization really starts with building a formal governance strategy. And you've probably seen the different variations of this, but from what we've seen here at All Cloud and working with our customers, It revolves around establishing these 4 key principles. The first one is the center of excellence, building out a steering committee, have key stakeholders, top-down leadership, pushing down the importance of using Salesforce internally, driving change management, onboarding new people on how, well, first off, getting comfortable with the company, but secondly, using tools like Salesforce and getting them ramped up as quickly as possible. Generally having an organization strategy. If you are pushing changes into your production environment and you want to minimize disruption to the users, do you have a full sandbox or do you have a partial sandbox? What are the differences between the two? And when you are building Salesforce for your team and for your users, what type of standards are you using when you're designing the application? Ultimately, these become all pillars for how you establish a governance strategy. And next becomes the question as to why. You may be using Salesforce as a general pipeline and forecasting tool. Maybe it's being used to enable your current support and marketing workflow. And as part of what governance does for organizations that we work with, establishing that really helps companies leverage Salesforce as a catalyst for a number of things. You'll see here for growth, for change and success. But more importantly, is your company raising money for your next round of funding? Is your company preparing your infrastructure for an IPO? Or is your company looking to get acquired? Or are they looking to scale and continue to be profitable? With that in mind, I'd like to start with the background about myself. So I've been in the ecosystem since 2006, and it's been an amazing experience, not only seeing hundreds of customers achieve success using the application, but also see Salesforce progress as more of a robust platform. I was a consultant at Salesforce in their professional services department, also helped spearhead a program that was focused purely on ensuring customer success. And from there, I started a company called Figure 8 Cloud Solutions in 2012, which was ultimately acquired by All Cloud in July of 2018. And the start of my cloud journey at Salesforce, and eventually the company that I co-founded, Figure 8, was initiated as a result of looking at Salesforce as something more than just a pipeline CRM tool. It became a catalyst for us for a number of different things, and also an eventual acquisition. And my co-founder and I, Richard Lotson, we use it to enable our business process and workflow and really help us grow through different stages in the company. And more importantly, we had set this idea up of governance very early on. So in today's webinar, I'm going to be sharing insight around what companies typically do after their initial implementation. Some of you may have just implemented it within the last 12 to 18 months and are wondering, what to do next. Others might have been using it for much longer and looking to understand some of the best practices for rolling out changes, building that infrastructure, and ultimately achieving some of your key goals. So talking a little bit about Figure 8 Cloud Solutions, for folks that are entrepreneurs, founders of a company, you know that the early years are the toughest. One thing I hear a lot from folks is sleepless nights. And for what it's worth, it's exactly that, for how my co-founder and I experienced it during this stage. And what was important for us was setting a foundation and staying alive. I think overall, there are a lot of things that kept us up at night. Cash flow, are we going to be able to raise money? Are we going to generate revenue? How can we make sure that our customers are happy with what we do? We were a services company, so we had to deliver what we call the perfect project. And how can we continue to hire and retain employees? We did make investments. Our first investment in technology, coincidentally, was Salesforce. We bought Gmail or G Suite to help capabilities across our business, as well as an accounting system called Wave. But during that period of the early years of our company, we also started to focus on building out our center of excellence. Now you're looking at this slide and probably wondering, well, there's quite a few people that we would need to establish for the center of excellence. Most of the time, your Salesforce administrator or yourself, you're playing all these different roles anyway, right? The technical director, a business director, being able to kind of mix between the business and IT departments, and being able to work with all the different departments within your organization so that you have these work streams continually providing feedback for how Salesforce should change. But what's important as a takeaway to this slide is being able to have this structured format, maybe something to shoot for. Within Figure 8, we had a small number of employees. We had 1 or 2 people doing this, but we understood the importance of being able to get feedback from the stakeholders, from folks that are driving different parts within your organization, so that Salesforce can continually grow as you continue to evolve as a business. Well, after our survival years, the early years, we then moved into the capital and growth phase, and that's what we called it. But there were still things that kept us up at night. How are we going to retain employees and customers? But at this point, as a services organization, we needed to keep up with the speed of balancing sales and delivery. So when projects were coming in that we were selling and how they were going to be delivered, how can we have a formalized view of everything coming into the overall picture? So being able to establish a fantastic culture so that employees would want to stay with Figure 8, we made some additional investments. We invested in our Salesforce platform. We also purchased a professional services automation tool called Financial Force. But one important item to what we were doing at this stage was introducing this concept of change management. As we start to hire more employees and onboard new folks, either from a sales and a delivery capacity or operations team, we needed to get people ramped up as quickly as possible. So we used Salesforce to really help define the standard for how we communicated change. And being able to get folks trained on the tools that we were using, getting them enabled so that they could quickly make an impact within the organization. But as folks would probably wonder, how do you start to use Salesforce to do that? Being able to use documentation, reusing information that can be distributed to teams, but really focusing on using Salesforce to help drive that part of your workflow overall. As we started to move and grow within our company, we had what we called our standardization phase. So we were continuing to grow, we were hiring employees, still continuing to have sleepless nights. But one focus area for us at this point was to be able to streamline our business processes across multiple departments. So having sales, having marketing, legal, IT, and finance all working in conjunction with each other, and then also focusing as a business leader, profitability and growth. We did continue to make investments in Salesforce. We started to leverage different parts of the platform to help manage our business. So for support, we leveraged Service Cloud. We also built what we called a managed services program and established this deployment of communities. So customers could log in and start to push requests over to us that we could support them on. From a marketing perspective, we started to use Pardot for helping to enable a lot of our marketing automation needs. And even more importantly to the idea behind streamlining our business process, we started to think about how are we going to integrate Salesforce with our systems. So taking a step back out of the Figure 8 story, for folks that are on the phone right now, if you're looking to integrate into your ERP system, if you're looking to integrate into some siloed application or back office, what's kind of the best strategy for doing that? And for us to be able to look at this holistically, it was important for us at Figure 8. But then came another component to our governance model, which was setting an organization strategy. I'm going to pause right here because a lot of times as you're getting into your deployment of Salesforce, it's really understanding what type of deployment methodology are you following. So if I'm going to be making changes within my Salesforce system as an admin, as a stakeholder, as somebody that's running the program, how often do I need to push things into production? And what's the strategy for doing that? Am I testing things in a developer sandbox? If I have other folks that are building within Salesforce, how do we start to consolidate and have a consistent process so that when we do implement a change to our users, we're not disrupting them. We're not breaking anything. For us at Figure 8, it was an important concept for us because every change that we made, we had to really think about, one, was there a design standard? Did we document why it was being built? And two, were other folks communicated and trained on using our change management concept, letting them know that this change was coming so that we ultimately were going to minimize any of those difficulties and having them, they were disrupted by changes that were made in the system. And as we kind of look at this holistically from the journey that we followed at Figure 8, at the time we were in our standardization phase, we wanted to make a decision on what our next goal was. And as I mentioned earlier on in the presentation, there are folks that are on this call right now that are looking to either go IPO, raise money for the next round, looking to continue to scale the business and be profitable, but again, using Salesforce as that catalyst for growth. Over at Figure 8, my co-founder and I made the decision that we wanted to get acquired. And one of the things, again, there were a lot of things that kept us up at night, improving our metrics, making sure that as leaders of the organization, we were continuing to focus on metrics that would help our company grow. And from an employee retention perspective, how could we get people continuing to want to work at Figure Eight and be excited about working within the culture that we'd established? So really defining this idea of organizational excellence. When we were starting to work with All Cloud, part of what really helped us through that acquisition phase was having the infrastructure set up. So the idea of building out that governance model was important for us earlier on, so that as we started to grow and started to document and make those changes through our due diligence process, all that information that we needed to provide was already there. Everything from our very first customer that we'd worked with, how sales was working with our delivery teams, how operations was handling reporting, and how executives were working together to get the information they needed. How we had other systems, like our accounting application, other tools that we're using, all flowing data within Salesforce so that we could easily pull reports as we needed. But the amount of information that we were able to derive and the fact that we had our infrastructure so well set up really helped us through that goal of getting acquired. And one of the takeaways from at least today's presentation is, it's really kind of something to think about as you're building out your company. And for us at Figure Eight, we were working so hard. There were different stages in our journey that we were so focused on that ultimately, because we were building out these concepts, that we were focusing on our effort to deploy Salesforce the right way and using it as a catalyst for our growth. At the end of the day, it really helped us through achieving our goals. And like I said before, no matter where you're at in the stage of your company, whether you're just trying to get up the front from your early years of trying to survive to building a process and building a workflow that's going to work for the rest of your team, to be able to use Salesforce to help drive that workflow is an important consideration. So in terms of what to consider doing now, it's never too late to build your roadmap. Start planning now. Being able to have a strategy if you don't have one just yet, working either with your account executive or with All Cloud or a partner that you're evaluating to help you prioritize what those goals are. So not just focusing on making those changes in Salesforce, but taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture. What is it that you're trying to achieve as a business, and how can Salesforce be that catalyst for those goals? More importantly, identifying key stakeholders. If you remember the slide that we had talked a little bit about the steering committee, having an executive sponsor, somebody that's driving the importance of the value that you've made in this investment in Salesforce, and driving those changes on an ongoing basis. Helping to build your strategy. So a lot of the times there are going to be questions around, well, where do I start with identifying key stakeholders? How often does it need to take place? And then also, when you're working to identify what other clouds are going to be the best fit for your organization, incorporating this idea of governance. So as you're planning out an additional rollout of Service Cloud, Marketing Cloud, CQ, whatever it might be, being able to have that governance model in place so that your infrastructure is set up to allow for it to happen without any disruption to your users is going to be key for the rest of your business. So in terms of who we are, what we did as Figure Eight, as a smaller company getting acquired, it was a very tough journey, I'd have to say. A lot of sleepless nights. But back to the point of focusing on governance and establishing a strategy was really important to us as an organization. And for us, and working here at All Cloud, that's kind of my role here, is being able to work with companies that have those questions, right? What is the best practice for rolling out the deployment of a specific cloud? How can I get folks to work together so that we can establish the steering committee and have stakeholders that are all bought in to help continue for the growth of the company? So I'm going to pause here and leave it open for some quick Q&A for folks that are on the line. Got one that just came in here, is how long does it typically take to build a steering committee? And my answer to that, it really depends. But the first priority would be to establish a stakeholder or key stakeholders as well as an executive sponsor. So if Salesforce has been purchased or invested in within your company, to have somebody that's driving that change at an executive level so that other departments can get on board. I would say typically for organizations we've worked with, it starts with about a month of planning, depending on the size of your organization. In terms of how often they take place, monthly steering committee meetings where you have about a 1.5 to 2 hour call to talk about what changes have been identified by the user community, which ones have been prioritized or what ones need to be prioritized for deployment into your production system, and which ones are going to make the most impact. There's also the discussions around what business values are going to provide and what cost will it take. But in terms of being able to establish a steering committee where you have folks from different departments that are key stakeholders is important. So as you go through this journey, it's important to really take that into consideration in the time that you're planning. Another one that just came in is how often do your deployments take? And this is an interesting one too, because in terms of how you're pushing changes in production, there's probably folks on the phone right now that are probably making changes in production right off the start, right? Hey, I'm a system administrator. I have 3 or 4 other folks that are system administrators making changes on an ongoing basis. As you start to grow and as you start to consider integrating to other systems, it's not that easy just to make a change to a field or make a change to some kind of workflow, because then another department's disrupted by it. For us and for how we work with organizations, sometimes they take place in what we call 2-week sprints, where you work with the users, you identify what those priorities are, you build and test them into a sandbox environment, and you deploy them into production. So as you start to get into that regular cadence, then you have the concept of refreshing your sandbox as well. It's really important to make sure you have all those things in line. How often are you going to make those changes into your production environment? How do you get folks within the organization on board with what you're going to be making changes to? In addition to that, setting the strategy for what clouds are going to come after that deployment. Sometimes you're going to be working with a partner that's more of a strategic deployment versus just making tactical changes. But in terms of how often those deployments take place, sometimes they come in 2-week sprints, sometimes they come in monthly sprints. So that's typically how we see it when we're working with our customers. Another question that just came in from the users is, how did you prioritize your investment in other Salesforce solutions? So that was a really good question. When we first had procured Salesforce and made an investment in the technology to help drive our business, the first was Sales Cloud. And for a lot of folks that are on the phone, Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, really focusing on establishing the concept of customer, getting that customer record into the application, and everything kind of falling from it. For us as a business, as we started to go through the different stages in our growth, from the early years to capital and growth, as we started to get other folks within our workflow or in each department needing to see customer data, that's kind of the trigger for us for determining what cloud was next. So in our journey, when we decided to prioritize in the support side, Service Cloud was right after Sales Cloud. As we started to put more investment into our marketing function, we then decided to purchase Pardot. And I think for everybody that's on the phone, depending on the size of your organization, that journey is going to vary. But it really depends on how can you strategically plan for rolling on different users within the organization. And sometimes there's what we call the litmus test, right? I'm going to start with a small pilot set of users for the finance department. They need to start to see information coming in from our ERP system. Okay, let's start to prioritize what part of Salesforce is going to be needed to deploy after that. Maybe consider an integration using a middleware and then defining a strategy for how we deploy it. But through all the different stages in your growth, to be able to take a step back and not just focus on the clouds, but look at where you want to be from a growth standpoint, that really helps drive what type of cloud you want to invest in next. Questions that come up, obviously work with your account executive or work with a partner to really help establish that. Another question that just came up was any tips for properly managing your sandbox? And absolutely. One consideration is knowing what sandbox environment you have. You'll hear this concept of a developer partial sandbox. You'll hear this concept of a full sandbox. When it comes to deploying changes into your production environment, testing it is always key, right? You always want to make sure that you're testing any of these changes because one, it could disrupt a user from doing something within the business, which could drive user adoption down. In terms of being able to set up your sandboxes properly, it's really also important to consider what type of sandbox it is. For folks that, and I talked about this earlier from an organization strategy, A full sandbox is a mirror of your production environment. And one of the reasons why that's important is, let's say, for instance, you're integrating into an ERP system or a back office. Well, you built the system the right way, the metadata or the configuration of the system is set up the way in which you want it to. But if you haven't tested it against your production data, let's say you have thousands or hundreds of thousands of records in your Salesforce system, that can be a key consideration that may not work correctly when you deploy in production. So having what we call a full sandbox, sometimes people call it a UAT, or user acceptance testing, allows you to really validate all the different use cases. Hey, if I'm a user and I'm pulling up record ABC and this is supposed to fire off within my system, was that properly tested? So being able to have a strategy for how often or what type of sandbox you're testing in and how often you're deploying those changes and what they call refreshing, right? Because if you make those changes in your production environment, you want your sandbox environments to be all consistent. So it's all about understanding what sandbox type that you have, also the timing for how you refresh it, and who has access to each one. I can tell you some stories about customers we worked with where sandboxes have been refreshed by accident, wiping out changes that people had spent weeks and months on. So it is important to take into consideration the type of sandbox, the timeline for which you refresh, and the strategy for how things move from one sandbox environment to the other. Another question that just came in from the users here is, can you talk a little bit more about establishing a COE and a steering committee? What role should be a part of it? So I'm gonna jump here to that slide that I had highlighted earlier on about a steering committee. And I'm gonna spend a little bit of time talking through this again. So in terms of establishing a center of excellence, as I mentioned before, this is kind of a target format or structure that a lot of enterprise organizations that we work with shoot for, right? So starting at the top, the little blue boxes, the boxes at the top in blue, having an executive sponsor, somebody at the leadership level that is pushing for the importance and the value that Salesforce provides for the organization. And then below that, highlighting the steering committee. So on the left-hand side, you'll see some resources here, see some roles here, a little bit more technical in nature, right? IT, the tech side, engineering, and on the right-hand side, the business. From a technical standpoint, individuals where you have a technical architect that's really understanding the landscape. What kind of applications are we using today? And how do these all come together as it relates to integration with our Salesforce system? A quality assurance individual, somebody that's actually testing these changes in production. Like I said, one of your Salesforce administrators or the admins that you have, as well as developers, can play and wear multiple hats. But to be able to have a technical focus where you have resources that are focused on development, configuration, that's declarative if we're making configuration changes in the system, or writing code, Apex, Visualforce, Lightning components, integration. On the right-hand side, you'll start to see more of the business focus, right? Change management and adoption. I talked a little bit about that. Training materials, videos. If I've set up Salesforce as an organization and I've hired 10 sales reps, how can I get them onboarded as quickly as possible so that they know where to go into Salesforce to create leads, to convert them to opportunities? If there's any help for coaching on sales strategy and guides for helping me win a deal or going through a sales cycle. So from a business perspective, not only having those materials ready for training and deployment, but continually working with the different stakeholders in each business department, with sales, with marketing, with support, to get that feedback so we can take what they need from a business standpoint, work with the technical resources on the left-hand side so that they can map that to how Salesforce should work and combine the two together. But having this holistic view, having this overall steering committee really helps to drive those changes in a very streamlined fashion. Another question that came in here from the users here, or the folks that are on the phone. I have a key stakeholder, developed a steering committee, initiated integration of processes through a Salesforce partner, and plan to launch Salesforce to the company within a month. Is there anything else I need to be considering? So in terms of the steering committee and establishing that governance model, it really comes back to driving towards the business goals, right? To not really, to really focus on the development of changes, implement in production, staying on top of the different releases. Salesforce is continually iterating on the platform, communicating that to the rest of the user community and educating them, but also not deterring or not disconnecting from the focus of what the business goals are. I'd say very much so, even through my story of Figure 8 and work with my business partner, Richard, a lot of the focus that we had building out our Salesforce application was driven from identifying what our business goals were. Hey, we want to ensure that our customers are continually going to be happy with the support they're getting from us. Okay, as a result, we need to be able to leverage something like Service Cloud and Community so that they can be better supported versus just getting emails and calls all day about maybe things that we need to make changes to or support them in a better way. So one thing that I will say is once the steering committee has been set up and you've launched it, to make sure that all the different changes that are being made in production that are discussed in your steering committee are focused on the business goals at hand. And whatever stage you are in your journey of growth within the company, to make sure that they're all aligned together. I had another question here. How does global program owner and COE business director role differ? And I think the answer is they can be one and the same. I think overall, for somebody that is a business director or a global program owner, that individual that's really driving those changes is really going to be heading up in this idea here, where you see the left-hand side, the COE technical director and the COE business director, that work stream or that line of the business or within the organization. So if I'm the COE business director, a lot of the focus is gathering requirements, talking to the user community, really understanding what their needs are from a process perspective, so that I can extrapolate that information and collaborate with our technical team so that they can build that functionality. One thing that I've learned, at least in terms of being able to identify how COEs work well, is there's a difference between a business requirement and a system requirement. As a business requirement, I need users, and we call them user stories. I need the user to be able to do this. Varying from a system requirement, I need the system to be able to do this. That's kind of hard to interpret as I say it, but ultimately the system can be configured to do certain things, but a lot of it should be driven from our perspective, what the business needs are for the growth and success of the organization. Hey, we need the users to be able to forecast accordingly and pull the following reports. Great. Well, Salesforce has the ability to do that, and here's how it can be done from a technical perspective. Another question that came in for change management, over the top ways that we drove user adoption. That's a really good question. So in terms of driving user adoption within your organization, once Salesforce has been set up, sometimes it comes with, how do we incentivize users to log in and start to use the application and log data? As best as you can to configure the system, you have this great roadmap and strategy for how you're going to roll out changes. You have an idea of what you're going to roll into the organization in terms of different clouds. Well, does it really matter if the users aren't logging in and getting value out of the system? So from a change management perspective, some of the things that we've seen as we work with organizations is how to incentivize and focus on what's the most important for the user. So as you're starting to develop a plan for how people get trained, taking a step back and focusing on what are the top 10 things that they need to do to get the job done. And then turning that into kind of a user story. Hey, you know what? As a sales rep, I need the ability to have a full 360-degree view of the customer, everything from interactions and history with that prospect or customer, how much I've sold to them. Great. Well, here are the 4 or 5 things that you can do. Since Salesforce is so robust and there's so many things to look at, let's kind of just narrow down on the top things that are most important for that user. In addition to that, leveraging chatter, leveraging the ability to collaborate across different departments. There's one thing that I've learned, at least being in the ecosystem, is that Salesforce can be such a collaborative tool where you don't have to continually develop or quote unquote reinvent the wheel when it comes to documentation. To be able to collaborate in context of a record. So as I mentioned before about this concept of customer, let's say we're working on a company or we're working on a prospect, and somebody within my organization or a large enterprise may have had contact with that company before. But being able to collaborate using chatter in context of what I'm talking about opens up doors for more communication more so ever than just email or email alias. So to be able to discuss that, to highlight what those key advantages are, really helps to drive adoption. Even to the point where I've seen it, hey, you give a $50 Starbucks gift card for the first set of folks that create 10 leads in Salesforce. If you're just rolling out the Salesforce application, you're trying to get people excited about using Salesforce, incentivize them. Say, hey, there's a leaderboard. The top folks that create 10 opportunities at a certain dollar value are going to get the following. But to be able to create that kind of gamify that type of culture within your organization so that everybody's open to starting to be transparent and communicate information across the board. Another question that came in here, looking back on how you grew your business, is there any one thing that stands out that you wish you had done sooner or differently when building your infrastructure? So as we start to start to build out our governance strategy and start to build out our application, part of what I wanted to be able to kind of focus on, and we didn't do a lot of this at the early stage, and again, this is just us as a company, was building our marketing function. A lot of what we were doing within our business and our ecosystem in getting leads was through word of mouth. And ultimately being able to take collateral of successful projects that we had completed and to be able to distribute that to our customer base and our prospect base a lot faster. So information pertaining to a project that we delivered, because in our business, we're services, and capturing that on Salesforce so that can be used from a marketing standpoint. Doing that a lot sooner is something that we could have did different. If I look back, something that I want to do differently. To be able to leverage customer stories to successes of projects and happy customers, and using something like Pardot, our marketing automation tool, to get that out to our community as fast as possible. And that would have been one thing that we would have done differently had we had kind of changed our operational process and our trajectory of what we had seen when we were growing our company and getting ready for acquisition. But to be able to leverage our marketing automation and using Pardot more effectively would have been something that we would change earlier on. Another question that came in here was rolling out. You need to roll out ideally to about 450 people. Would a phased approach be recommended? Really good question. We have done deployments where we're rolling out to thousands of different users. And the most important thing for us to look at is, of the people, in this case about 450 people, of the folks that you're rolling out Salesforce to, what departments do they fall under? Is it sales? Is it support? Is it marketing? And doing kind of a user assessment. So in terms of change management, typically what we do is really get an understanding and quote unquote a sophistication level of the user base. You can kind of segment them into different tiers, right? Folks that are going to be super excited about using a new platform, that are completely comfortable with the CRM. Maybe they used Salesforce in the past. Then you got the folks in the middle that are, you know what, I'll kind of do what's asked me. I've used CRM in the past. And then you got some folks that might be naysayers. They're people that aren't familiar with using Salesforce. In terms of rolling out Salesforce, a phased approach would be recommended depending on the folks that you're going to be deploying Salesforce for in the first phase. At the end of the day, you want to establish kind of a template for success. So identifying your user group, and it could be everybody. It could be different departments, but folks that are going to be evangelists or champions that can help train other users that might be struggling a little bit within your organization. So if you were to roll out to about 450 people and it's multiple departments, absolutely can still be done. And it really comes down to doing an assessment of the user base first, but it can be across multiple departments. It could be sales, it could be service and marketing or support, whatever that is, but at least identifying users within those different departments that can act as champions or evangelists for how Salesforce should be used, so that when training time comes, when you're trying to onboard users, you're going to user acceptance testing, you're getting ready for the deployment, they can act as champions for you and help you get through some of the obstacles that might be ahead of you when it comes to training folks. All right. I'll give it another second here if there's any other questions that I can answer about Figure 8 story, about how we establish governance, building out a center of excellence, and helping your organization succeed when they're using Salesforce. Oh, a question just came in. We're struggling to get full buy-in from executives and any advice. So in terms of getting buy-in, even at the executive level, it really, the way that we look at it, it comes down to the investment, right? There's an investment that's made in Salesforce. Ultimately, it works for hundreds and thousands of different customers, and they've been able to achieve success because they've been able to make it work properly for the organization. For getting buy-in from different executives, it really comes down to what I had mentioned before about what are the top things that are going to work for them? What are their priorities and business goals? A lot of the times, when you look at Salesforce and say, well, it's not really working. Is it the right solution? I think part of it's taking a step back again, figuring out what those business goals are, and then focusing on the effort to analyze what is Salesforce going to do to help achieve those business goals. So for some executives, as an example, say for instance, we want to get buy-in from a CFO, or somebody in finance. What's the need for Salesforce? Well, let's take a step back and kind of paint the picture. If we're able to have financial data from an ERP, as an example, flow within Salesforce, and then we can start to look at our bookings and our sales information with regards to what our revenue is, and having that all within an application to report on, that starts to create incentive and excitement around what value do I get out of Salesforce as a result. So in terms of if you're working with within an organization and there's executives that might have challenges with understanding the value of Salesforce, taking a step back, understanding what their goals are, spending the time to really understand where Salesforce can come into the picture. And if I have to kind of talk a little bit about our Figure 8 story, that was one thing that we considered when we were deploying out the application. It was really from an executive level, what part of the business did I need to make sure that's going to drive change within the company? And then focusing on those goals and then rolling it into a specific Salesforce piece of functionality. Again, Sales Cloud, Marketing Cloud, Service Cloud, or Communities. All those different parts of the application, in some shape or form, drove our growth goals in some way. And I'd say it depends on spending the time with those executives to get a sense of what they're really trying to achieve, and then understand, and then paint the picture of how Salesforce is going to help address that. Because again, like I said, thousands of other customers are kind of doing the same thing, and being able to marry the business and IT goals together so that you have the right solution is really important when deploying any changes in the system, but also getting buy-in from other folks in the organization. All right. I know we have a little bit of time left here. Katie, or anybody from the All Cloud side, any questions or comments or what we should recommend in terms of next steps?
Thank you, OJ. If everyone can see, there's a blog that we've written with a great touching on getting started with Salesforce governance and some great tips. And so you can get that at the top of your browser. So we encourage you to learn more and read more and reach out with any questions. But Trip, OJ, thank you for today's presentation. Thank you to everyone who's joining. And we will be sending this recording out following for those of you who have asked and would like to share and leverage within your organization. Trip, OJ, anything else?
That's it from my side. Thanks everybody for their time today.
Great. Thanks, everyone.